Բարի երեկո հարգելի բարեկամներ, Հորիզոն հայկական հեռուստակայանն է ցեզի հետ եւ ահավասիկ ամենօրյա մեր նույն ժամուն։ Երեկոյան ժամի 7-ին մեր հանդիպումը ցեզի հետ ուղիղ եթերով եւ այսպես Հորիզոն Live։ Հարգելի հարազատներ, կրկին անգամ ողջունենք ձեր բոլորը եւ գանցնենք մեր այսօրվան զրույցին։ Նախքան մեր զրուցակիցը ծանոթացնելը ցեզի, կուզեմ ծանոթացնել զրույցի թեման։ Գիտենք բոլորս անգլիական կամ ամերիկյան, մեկ խոսքով անգլերենով ասացված մգա, կոդ մգա, որ գսե don't kill the messenger, մի սպանեք պատգամապերը։ Իսկ մենք այսօր պիտի խոսենք պատգամապերը սպանելու մասին, kill the messenger։ Իսկ ինչու համար այս թեման եւ ինչ կնշանակի այս բոլորը։ Եթե գիշեք, քանի որ առաջ ընդամենը ցեզի ներկայացուցին հատուկ ռեպորտաժը կրկի մշնորհանտեսին վերաբերյալ եւ այդ գիրքը գոչվեր Kill the Messenger եւ այդ կրկին ահավասիկ կտեսնենք այստեղ արդեն դեսարաններն ունի այդ ռեպորտաժին եւ կրկին հեղինակը Մարիա Արմուդյանը, որուն մասին ակնարկեցինք, որուն հավանաբար շատ նույնպես ծանոթ են իր ամենօրյա ռադիոժամերեն, այս երեկոյան մեզի հետ է։ Եվ մենք կզրուցենք հեղինակին Մարիա Արմուդյանին հետ about killing the messenger. Good evening. Parev. Most probably the first question that would pop up, not into my mind, because I know you, into the mind of some of our viewers. Who exactly is Maria Armoudian?
Oh, who is that is the hardest question of all.
Really?
Yeah.
I agree with you.
So, I'm a budding scholar in training. I'm a radio host. I am obviously an author and a musician.
And a lady with hopes.
With some hopes.
Why some? I guess because you are kind of concerned in the fate of the world. And what we see around us nowadays, at least, and it has been, I think, always the same.
Some pretty dark times.
Dark times.
Yeah.
That's why maybe some hope.
Well, we certainly are seeing that humanity has the potential for doing really great things. Humanity also has the potential for doing really awful things. As we know, being Armenians, we've experienced some very awful things. And part of what motivated the book, actually, was trying to understand why people either do the really awful things or do the really good things as a mass. And part of what I realized was that the message really makes a huge difference. Today, with modern media propagates a message, and certain messages motivate emotions and behavior that are very destructive, and certain messages motivate behavior that is much more positive and progressive and constructive.
I was trying to find out whether you were or you are the optimist or the pessimist, and I could sense that you are still somewhere in between. And I understand the reason, because I work in the media at the same time, and I understand what goes around and what happens. It makes a big difference how you're represented to the people that are either listening to you or watching you. Հարկելի բարեկամներ, Kill the Messenger, ահավասիկ այդ կրկին խորակիրը, որուն ենթա խորակիրը կգարտանք այսպես, the media's role in the fate of the world. Այսինքն, միջոցքի, մեդիայի թերագադարությունը աշխարհի ճակատագրին վրա. Maria, as a media man like you, I am media woman, of course. Well, I
just want to make sure you can tell.
Well, see, now we're playing media already. I want to understand what kind of I might be understanding a little bit, but I guess there is something to reveal more truth for me here. What kind of a difference am I making, or I might be making, in the world?
Well, one of the things I say about one of the things that's really important in a society is ensuring that we have a diversity of viewpoints and a diversity of culture and a diversity of arts. And one of the great things in a city like Los Angeles is that we have multiple channels where people can get information about their own cultures and their own religion and their own arts and their own politics. And I think that is vital in keeping those things alive. How would people know about these things without some kind of a media allowing us to engage in those things? So your work enables your community to find out about things they would otherwise not find out about.
And in the sense of the content of the book, what kind of, because it says that media's role in the fate of the world, what kind of a role, what kind of a difference could media make? I understand what you're talking about, but I wanna some details maybe the media could make in the fate of the world. I understand the way you present the news, the way you analyze the situation. You've been in that same situation for a long time. Makes a difference. But sometimes that difference could be, as you just said, destructive or constructive, positive or negative, pessimistic or optimistic. And that's where I think the role of the media workers makes a difference. Please, I need the details.
Okay, so one of the important points in this is that how information is presented, or we call it a frame, impacts the meaning people take away from it. So if you tell a story where you portray one group as the victims and one group as the perpetrators, people are going to come away with that and really dislike the group that are the perpetrators. And this can be done in multiple ways. They ran experiments where they gave people the same exact information about the KKK. Once it was presented as a rally they were going to do and presented in a free speech frame. The other time, they presented it as a public safety frame. And people decided to allow and tolerate a KKK march when it was presented as free speech. And when it was presented as public safety, they didn't support it at all. So this is a subtle frame, but I look at much bigger things, much deeper, much more destructive. I looked at, for example, what happens when extremists have control of the media and disseminate messages about a particular group that lead their fellow country people to get destructive with them. So I looked at 3 genocidal examples. I could not get the material on the Armenian genocide enough to make a full chapter of it, but it occurred during the Armenian genocide too. But the one that was the most obvious was the case of Rwanda. And this was a country that had some socio-political problems, but socio-political problems exist everywhere. And people can either resolve them together or not. But what happened is, before this one particular radio station came in, the 2 ethnic groups were essentially living together fairly harmoniously. Every group is going to have bickering, and every group is going to have some conflict. It's just the nature of people.
That's very normal.
But they were essentially marrying, intermarrying. There's not that much difference between them. Religion is the same, history is the same, culture is the same. They were going to school together, church together. But this radio station, which came in, it was held by a private company, and everybody listened to it. They were hip. They had the best music. They had the best jokes. They had the best political commentary. And then they started putting in this particular message, blaming all of the country's problems on one particular ethnic group, and creating fear about this group, that if they weren't essentially annihilated, they were going to ruin everything we cared about, and they're going to annihilate us. And by the way, this is a message that was used during the Armenian genocide too, about the Armenians.
Actually, that's what I was thinking about when you were talking about Rwanda, because it exactly was the same parallel. For a very long time, Armenians and Turks were living together. They're doing business together. They were, I might not say they were marrying, but they were living together.
Because there were religious differences.
Exactly.
Right.
But all of a sudden, something changed. Well, maybe there weren't radio stations at that time, but there were other ways of delivering certain messages. And that's why
there was print, there was telegraph.
Mainly print and telegraph, but at least, I mean, after all, they were communication ways and means. And all of a sudden, things changed, and the Armenians started to present danger on the Ottoman Empire.
And one of the things you find is, and this is across all genocides, and even in some wars, that to motivate people to actually destroy or support the destruction of a group of people, there has to be several elements. There's a selective use of history. So history is a very broad thing, but you pick a few things where a few people did bad.
And maybe even you put them out of the context.
Take them out of context, and you don't include the why or the how or any of the good things they might have been doing, or the other people who are doing great things. So you kind of pick that little piece and you make a story about it, about the entire people.
And that leads after all, to, I don't know what to call it, a genocide, a massacre, calamities, and at the same time, again, I was thinking about Yugoslavia.
Yeah.
They were living together for decades.
Decades.
Exactly, and all of a sudden, one republic, so-called republic, decides to get independence, and the other one does the same thing, and all of a sudden those ethnic conflicts come to the top, come to the surface. We'll talk about that, and we'll talk about the implementations of such things right after this, after we come back from the commercial break. Հարկելի բարեկամներ, շատ հետաքրքրական թեմա է, եթե գեհդեվիք բնականաբար գենտատրեմ, որ մեծամասնության համար անգլերեն զրույցը շատ ընդունելի եւ հասկանալի, սակայն ոմանց համար քիչ հետ կփորձեմ ամփոփել, անմիջապես որ վերադառնանք այս ընդմիջումեն։ Շարունակենք մեր զրույցը հարգելի բարեկամներ, անոնք որոնք կհետևեին, գսեի մեր զրույցը պատգամապերը սպանելու մասին է։ Kill the Messenger, ահավասիկ խորակիրը, այն կրկին, որում մասին կզրուցենք եւ կզրուցենք ՈՒԱԳ-ի հեղինակին հետ։ Մարիա Արմուդյանը կպատրաստի արդեն իր դոկտորական աստիճանը նաեւ եւ կրկին ենթախորակիրը The Media's Role in the Fate of the World, ուրեմն մեդիայի միջոցքի թերը աշխարհի ճակատագրի մեջ։ Մենք խոսեցանք, Մարիա Արմուդյանը խոսեցավ որոշ օրինակներու մասին, եւ այդտեղ զուգահեռներ կծեց, թե ինչպես այդ մեդիան գրնա այդպիսի մթնոլորտ եւ դրամատուրգիա ստեղծել որոշ խմբակցություններու մասին, որոնք այդ մթնոլորտ եւ դրամատուրգիա ասել ուզեմ գրնան իրականություն չլալ կամ իրականության ամենափոքր մասնիկը լալ եւ այդ մթնոլորտին եւ այդ դրամատուրգիան հիման վրա գրնան շատ մեծ չարագործություններ իրակորձվել այդ խմբակցության նկատմամբ։ Ըլլա այդ մեկը ազգային խմբակցություն, թե կրոնական խմբակցություն, թե քաղաքական խմբակցություն, կամ որևէ մտածողության ուրեմն խմբակցություն, եւ Մարիան փորձեց իհարկե ներկայացնել օրինակները, սկսելով Ռուանդային, անմիջապես անցնելով հայկական ցեղասպանության, ու զուգահեռները շատ հստակ են, իսկ ես վերջավորության կանգնարկեի Յուգոսլավիայի եւ Յուգոսլավիան բաժնվել են հետ Bosnia'i. Before talking about the Bosnian example, I think you might be willing to go back to Rwanda, because there is another parallel that you can draw over there too.
Right. Well, it's actually the example that shows best the role of media in life and death situations, because right next to Rwanda is a country called Burundi. They used to be the same country. So the ethnic groups are the same, the history is the same, the religion, and the political dynamics are slightly different but very similar. Well, so in Rwanda, in 100 days, they killed about 800,000 of one ethnic group. They called them the Tutsis. In Burundi, the same kind of fratricidal killing was going on, but something shifted, and the communities ended up coming back together and reconciling. And the big difference between them, when you really look, is that in Rwanda you had this very hateful media message targeting one group, and by the way, organizing genocide. But in Burundi, a group of journalists funded by some American and other international nonprofits came together and decided to change what was coming out of the media. Now, they never had something as bad as what Rwanda had, but they still had very polarized media that were antagonizing each other. So these journalists came together, and every time they made a report, one of each ethnic group had to come together do the interviews together, and they couldn't put it out unless they agreed on it. Then at the same time, so that you couldn't have rumors, you couldn't have lies, you couldn't have a frame that was completely biased towards one side or the other. Then at the same time, they had these forums where they would have political and psychological experts explaining the war and the causes of the war. And then callers would call in and they'd talk about their experiences. So one of the things that happened in this process is that during the war, if you saved somebody of the other ethnicity, you were considered a traitor and you were marked for death.
Of course.
But during this forum, as they aired these forums, people started anonymously calling in and admitting that they were saving people of the other ethnicity. And they eventually became known as heroes.
In the eyes of humanity, maybe. At least the first stage.
And then, but as time went on, people started bragging about saving people of the other ethnicity. So, and it encouraged more and more of this kind of behavior. And people started coming together more. They did many more things, but those are just two examples of how the media were different in Burundi versus Rwanda, where the other dynamics were very much the same. One went more the route of peace, the other was a very awful genocide.
And that's why in this case, I shouldn't say maybe, and that's why the number of the victims on both sides was much, much, much less in Burundi. And I guess some of our viewers already remember those dates. It wasn't too far in the history. It was less than 20 years ago.
Right.
And do I understand here that it's a matter of, because you brought up the example of the journalists and the media people, do I understand? I do understand, but let's make it clear. Is it the goodwill that made that big difference?
What do you mean by the goodwill?
The journalist who came...
Right. It was a commitment to being accurate, for one. So one of the things that was occurring was that these rumors were being spread. So there might be a rumor disseminated by one side that the others were coming to get you. So what would happen? It would become a self-fulfilling prophecy because the others would go after them first to prevent it.
And the reason I'm saying this, because it was very, very clear and very distinct in this case. One side, the journalists, the media people who had this thought, and they organized all those forums, and they, came up with maybe a new wave of thinking.
Yeah.
And on the other side, again, in an organized way and in a targeted way, the media people kind of organized the genocide.
Exactly.
So that's why people should think about putting that goodwill into work. And maybe I'm asking you, is this why you want to kill the messenger? Because the messenger is delivering a bad message. As we know, sometimes the messenger is the message. Yeah. Is that true?
Yeah, what I say in there is, look, I'm not saying we should kill media. I'm not saying we should kill journalists. I'm saying we should kill the approach we have to media. And there's a reason for it. We are entering an age where any single person can destroy a city of 100,000 people with a very simple suitcase bomb. We saw something just occur in Norway where a young man, convinced that his society was being destroyed by immigrants coming in, decided to take matters into his own hands and kill people that were encouraging this kind of tolerance. Now, where did he get those messages?
Exactly.
He got them through the internet. Well, so these messages are getting through in a very different way now. And they're not being blocked. They're not being, as traditional media used to have, gatekeepers. So I'm saying, look, it's time now we have to think about everything that we say and do, because it motivates one person with that kind of destructive power. It's time to build a better media in hopes of building a better humanity. And
a better way of delivering the message itself. Because I am 110% sure that you know and you remember Gabrielle Gifford,
yes,
the congresswoman from Arizona. Again, the same case. Look, we're talking about Norway, North Europe. We're talking now about the next state, right? Our neighbors.
Well, there's actually a better example, even.
Well,
and this happened 3 years ago in 2008, and it's a better example because there's a very clear connection to the media. There was a gentleman who lived in Knoxville, Tennessee. His name was Jim David Atkinson. And he had been listening to these messages that said that liberals were destroying America. And they were a pestilence, and they had to be stopped. And the messages were coming over some of these AM radio networks and through the internet. And he openly wrote up a manifesto that said he had to take matters into his own hands because he loved his country and he had to save it. Now, he said in his manifesto he wanted to kill all the liberal Congress people. And he wanted to kill all the liberal members of the media, but he didn't have access to them, so he instead went to their supporters. And he walked into a church, a Unitarian Universalist church, where a bunch of children were putting on a play, Annie Jr., and he took out a shotgun that he had put in a guitar case, and he opened fire on the church. And he killed several people before they could tackle him and police could arrest him. And he admitted, he said, well, yeah, I believe what I did was the right thing.
Yeah, because I think he thought he was the only person who loved his country. And that's another way of thinking about the media. Sometimes the media delivers this message that you are the only one who would be able to save this country or that country, whatever country we're talking about. And that's why I brought the example from the US.
Right.
Norway, US, the same thing, the same reasons, the same message, the same media. And they got this information that made them think in the way they thought. And of course, one killed about 92 people, one killed or tried to kill actually a congresswoman. Here is the...
And did kill several congressmen.
And of course,
her
AIDS.
supporters.
Exactly. Right. So here is the question. Well, actually, the question will come after the break. Հարգելի բարեկամներ, կովասներն ամիջապես հետո շարունակենք։ Կշարունակենք մեր զրույցը արգելի բարեկամներ, Մարիա Արմուդյանն է մեզի հետ Kill the Messenger կրկին հեղինակը։ Անգամ եւս կվեր հիշեցնեմ, որ կրկին ենթախորակիրը գսե մեդիայի ռոլը, մեդիայի դերակատարությունը աշխարհի ճակատագրին մեջ։ Եվ ես խոստացած էի եւ ցեզի եւ Մարիային, որ հարցումով մտիմեմ սակայն անպայման կովասներն ամիջապես հետո։ Does it make, Maria, does it make any difference about the media that existed like 90 years ago, 100 years ago, or the media today? Because as we understand, maybe 90 years ago or even 60 or 50 years ago, the only way people had to get information was print paper and radios. Later on came TV. Now a 6-year-old or a 5-year-old can sit in front of the internet and see what happened 3 seconds ago in the farthest part of the world.
Yeah.
We were talking about Norway, we were talking about Arizona, internet, computers. Does it make a difference?
It makes a huge difference. It makes several different kinds of differences. For one, all of the oppressive governments of the world are trying to stop people from being able to communicate. But as we saw what happened in January when Tunisia used the social networking to communicate, it took these executives at Facebook, by the way, to constantly circumvent the government. And then we saw it happen again in Egypt. And the combination of the new media with cable television, like Al Jazeera and CNN, and then it spread all over the world. Now, that's one thing that everybody's aware of now. But there are other cases like this. In Burma, where the government is still oppressing people and speech and democracy, these democracy activists have their little phones and they are videotaping the abuse and then they're uploading it and it's going out to Europe and the United States. In Iran, when they had the Green Movement, the marches, they caught all of the beatings on the street, uploaded it, sent it over the internet. So there's more information that's able to get out. The other thing,
Aung San Suu Kyi is getting the Nobel Prize for Peace.
Yeah, well,
despite the situation that she's living in.
Yeah. At the same time, it speeds up the process. So before there was a news cycle where you get the newspaper in the morning or you take the morning news or the evening news. Now it's 24-hour news cycle. As soon as something happens, it's up. And everybody has to come. And very fast. So it used to take a very long time to organize a massacre or a rescue, on the other hand. Now it can be instantaneous. It's just, you saw what happened in Britain. People were texting each other and beating the police because they were using the BlackBerry technology to get around. So those are a couple of things. The other thing is what I say is kind of a good and a bad of not having the traditional media gatekeepers. We say gatekeepers, people who blocked messages that might have, A, not been true, which was the good side. So now we get things that aren't true all the time on the internet. And people say, oh, I read it on a blog, I think it's true. But there's no evidence, there's no fact-checking. That's the bad side. The good side is, you know, we here can communicate with people in Armenia and all over the world and put our projects together.
You remind me of the fact that people used to think about saying, that's true because it was on TV.
Right.
And, you know, my last question would be, and we have only 1 minute left actually, my last question would be, we're talking about politics mainly, but the same, I think the same thing applies for fields that are not political fields.
Well, everything's
science field, environmental field, and so on and so on. Global warming.
Yeah. Well, everything is political.
After all.
Well, yeah, I mean, what you and I can do individually is completely a function of politics. Yeah, you mentioned the science. One of the things we saw over the last couple of years was the ability of certain industries to destroy the credibility of science. And part of how they did that was there was an email exchange between scientists about climate change. The scientific community knows there's no debate about the realities of global warming and climate change. But some of the industries that wouldn't like to protect it broke into the emails, took a couple of words out of them, circulated it, and made them look like they were sinister.
Not certain.
Or not even just not certain, made them look like they were sinister. And people started to doubt scientists and science. And these are people that are doing us a huge service in the world.
Well, actually, you made a huge service in the world by writing this book, and հարկելի բարեկամներ գենտատրեմ, որ բոլորս ալ գիտակցին, թե որքան կարևոր է մեդիան, որքան կարևոր է միջոցը, եւ իսկապես ինչպիսի մեծ դերակատարություն ունի մարդոց մտածողության, ուրեմն վերապերյալ եւ այդ մտածողությունը եթե կարելի է գառուցելու վերապերյալ ցերկիս է հավասիկ կսեի քիրքը Kill the Messenger, the media's role in the fate of the world եւ ահավասիկ հեղինակը Maria Armoudian մեզի հետ. And Maria, congratulations. I know today is the official date of the releasing of this book. It's the publication date, the official date. So congratulations. Եվ բաշտոնապես այս քիրքը արդեն հրատարակված կլա այսօր եւ մենք առաջին օրնիսկ ուրախություն ունիմս որ գզրուցենք կրկին մասին, կրկին փոխանցագության մասին, կրկին հեղինակին հետ Maria Armoudianին հետ. Գսպասենք այլ անգամներ. We will be at least expecting you in the next few months for, I don't know what kind of update, but we will be expecting you here. Thank you very much for being here with us tonight. Եվ հարկելի բարեկամներ, ինչպես լսեցիք, Kill the Messenger նոր գիրքն է, որը հրատարակվեցավ եւ հրապարակվեցավ պաշտոնապես այսօր Մարիա Արմուդյանի հեղինակությամբ մեր հայազգի հայրենակցուհին։ Գերգին անգամ շնորհակալություն եւ ամիջապես կովասներին հետ կվերացառնանք մեր օրվան ռեպորտաժով եւ ծրագրի հաջորդ փոքր հատվածներով։